fulfilling the environmental standards to get more, or who devote the film to a specific topic obtain additional points, or it's easier for them to access public funding for their film, to summarize. In the breakdown of the budget, just like in cost recognition, we will incorporate a series of items, and in due time, this will include the person in charge of environmental surveillance as one additional cost that can be incorporated into the recognition of costs to request the subsidy. And all of these after an initial statement, responsibility or accountability statement, and then going on to an eco label that guarantees that you are fulfilling the environmental standards. An independent body will guarantee it, and in the end, the idea should be not only obtaining points, gaining points, it would need to be a sine qua non condition in order to get the substantial subsidies that the public administration provides to this industry, to the cinema industry. So in order to get these subsidies in the future, it should be necessary to fulfill those obligations. What happens here? People are reluctant. There are a couple of sayings which are nive, not in my electoral year, so it's all very nice and good to do a good practice handbook, but not in my electoral year, and the nimi, not in my backyard, nimby. It's all very nice, I'm very green, and I go to demonstrations, and this and that, I'm a cinema producer, and I'm all for the planet combating CO2, but then in my production, no, do not tell me I need to separate waste, do waste sorting, or the water bottles that you mentioned, these water bottles that are given to people, they cost 90 cents. Oh, those reusable bottles, sorry, are 90 cents, and it's a lot cheaper than using plastic water bottles, so these are things that we can incorporate in the process.
Valerie?
Yes. Well, I also think that in order for this to be effective, any recommendation or any obligation, taking something as an obligation, that is basically what works in the end of the day, those things that are applied by law. It's good when it's communicated, because when we produce, we are like a piece of machinery, and once the shooting starts, it's the same with a festival or any event. Once we start, it's very difficult to make decisions. So these decisions need to be made previously, knowing which are the ones that can be applied consciously and responsibly. When we start, we are incapable or almost incapable of not falling into the temptation of what is easier, of course, and sometimes being sustainable is even more complicated than not being sustainable nowadays. So preparation and pre-production are so important because of this. In all the decisions we make in production, that's also important, but if this is an inherent part of production, if we know it beforehand, that will already be part of the game and will not be questioned.
Carlotta, how is it in Catalonia? What do you think is the mindset of producers? Are they already in a green mindset? Are they already aware of sustainability measures, or do they need a lot of training and information?
Yo creo que, como decía Valerie,
I was saying, I think that practically in the last year, the perception has changed a lot, and also the inclusion of sustainability in shootings because of personal motivations, but then also in the case of many advertising productions in Catalonia, we do lots of services for international productions. They've been forced to include sustainability criteria that are marked by the clients themselves. International clients ask for shootings here to follow some criteria. So these two things are combined, the personal interest of going beyond this concern for the environment, so going from the private to the corporation, and also the demands of the market. not only from the production sector, but also from the municipalities themselves. There's a greater concern for the environment and environmental issues. The other day, I couldn't attend to the first part of the session today, but you know that on Wednesday we were in Figma talking about with the city council talking about this, and they announced that they're doing a handbook of good practices, which follows the criteria of ICAA, and it will have these similar stages: recommendation, valuation or assessment, and finally recommendation. There's no specific criteria set yet, but this is the line we're working along. So both from production and from the territory itself, this concern is there, and we're working. Just to give you a specific example of Barcelona, the other day we were told that there'd been the first shooting in the city without generator and hooked onto the public grid. Not only in Barcelona, but other municipalities in the territory are also working with their own electricity suppliers to avoid these things.
The infrastructure is there and the grid is there, so you just have to attach a cable and then you can get the energy. The second thing is, of course, the transportation. So Eva, as a festival, you have also the requirement that you have to have directors at the festival, and of course it also creates a carbon footprint if they travel a lot. So how do you deal with it as a festival to reduce the environmental impact?
Ser organizado como...
Well, being organized the way it's organized with my group, we are mutualizing this. We have been doing so for a very long time. So when a director comes from Latin America, for instance, we almost from the beginning, we have done a route of the director. So in Occitanie, we have a network of cinemas, around 80 cinemas. So when the director comes to accompany a distributed film, because it's easier to facilitate circulation, we send the director to do presentations in tiny villages or municipalities and also bigger cities for 10 days. So this is a way. At first, it was allowing for cultural diversity to reach smaller towns too, that will never get to know a Latin American director or filmmaker for the rest of the year because it's very difficult. They don't have the resources. But now, the truth is that now awareness is more in terms of acting, so that a transatlantic trip is not for only 2 days, to make it a bit more sustainable, ecologically speaking. So the awareness now is different, and we are opening up the matter of programming and planning of the festival so that the films or competing films, well, that's the only section in which we invite directors and filmmakers. So this should also be shared with some other events that take place at the same time as ours. We have the premiere, of course, but that is done in Toulouse. But then maybe on the following day, the director could just visit another festival to present his film. So we are going to do this. We are already doing it, but we are going to communicate the list of films to our collaborators and to other festivals, so that a Mexican director can come to Toulouse and then can go to Grenoble and then Villeneuve, and we're also in touch with other festivals outside of France. So
Armando eso, pero eso cuesta también.
Organizing this, but this means that we need to rethink our premiere matter and our organization and planning. what we also do for circulation in France is to travel by train, and in the regions the driving is done in a car. The trip is on a car, but they're shared cars. So we are partners of this company, of shared car companies. We pay a fare and we can then use these shared cars, which are hybrid, and we take our guests around the region. So we try to generate the least possible impact with the means that we have at hand. So it is true that there is more mutualization or sharing of guests and of agendas, and this means that we have less of an individual impact, and the community can enjoy more and make the most of those gatherings and those films without generating greater environmental impact.
Festivals are often hosting films as a premiere, so they are really the beginning of the exploitation chain of films, and then of course films do have fortunately a longer life, which makes them sustainable itself, and so at the other end of the exploitation chain of movies, then there's nowadays of course VOD, streaming, which is not so sustainable, but also DVD. So Susanna, you just mentioned you have a system for printing DVDs on demand. How does this work?
Oh, yes. Well, we do have our in-house, it's just a little printer machine. It kind of looks like a printer you have for paper. It could print 20 DVDs at a time if I wanted to, but usually I print just the one for the order. And we found that has really reduced we didn't have to make bulk orders anymore just to get the price down, and it reduced the paper we would use. But also for the large distributors, they're also going to, we outsource a lot now. There's one company in the United States a lot of the distributors and studios are using, because as the DVDs have declined in popularity, less had to be made. So now they're mostly made just on demand. And so that has proven really popular. The biggest seller of on-demand is Amazon. And as well as DVDs, when it comes to promotion of films, and the filmmakers love to have T-shirts with their, film, their logo, whatever. And so print on demand for merchandise has gotten very popular too. And this is around the world. And I work with a filmmaker, and I noticed, because I'm a graphic designer, so I could make the files, and I upload them to various print-on-demand sites. Like there's Redbubble, they're in Australia, and they're also in the US. There's Printful, who's in Europe and the US, and Amazon is around the world. But I saw an order, 7 orders for one film come in from England, and so I contacted the US producer, and I said, why, there's 7 orders for your film T-shirt? He goes, oh, we just had a screening in London. I was like, oh, so they didn't have to, there's no inventory. So this also reduces the, the need for printing of shirts and carrying them around with you. So they found that's very effective, and it's effective cost-wise. So when something's effective cost-wise, it also, and the trickle down is it also has a, environmental, less impact on the environment as well. But I also wanted to say about the streaming, we have one filmmaker that said, oh, but I already have my film on streaming. I said, where? He said, well, we wanted to use a streaming platform that had, was using reusable energy. And I said, oh, I haven't heard of this. And he said, oh, it's Karma Tube. I think that was the name of it. So I go and I look and I see it exists. And I said, well, that's great. How are your, are you happy with the results, like people watching your film, because you made your film to be seen? He says, oh yes, people watch it there, but not as much. Because, when the company's starting out, they need to, it takes a long time to build up the awareness about it. So he said, could you also put it on Amazon so we could go into the US and the UK? And if you have subtitles for the other German and Japanese, then your film can go more places. And so we decided that we would also put it on Amazon, just because he wanted more eyeballs on his film as the other platform was growing in awareness of that they used it, renewable energy, and their mission. Their mission also fit his mission. And so, so there's a number of platforms out there now, and it all goes. It really depends on how much time you want to spend uploading all these files, and it's a time-consuming process, and but the results could be worth it, to get your film seen and not have to send the DVDs around.
Yeah, it always comes really down to saving resources, and so you can also do it in marketing and promotion by better planning, as you already do in film production, by better planning, and then also, of course, trying to reuse the resources which we have used on film, where you could maybe try to resell costumes and stuff like this. But of course, this is then limited, and I don't know if there are any experiences with this already.
Well, I wanted to say a film that we're distributing for a few years is called Trashed, starring Jeremy Irons, and one of the agreements we made is that we would reuse DVD covers, because public libraries still, they order DVDs because not everyone has streaming in many regions. And so we found that many public libraries, they get in new DVDs, they open them up, take out the disc, take out the artwork, because they have to put it in a special security case, so, to protect their DVD. And then they have boxes of basically brand new cases. So we would send these libraries there's a listserv of media buyers that I post on. And I said, I will send you a postage paid label if you give me, put 100 in a box, tell me the weight, and I'll send you a label, and then they send the box to us, and they look new, like you can't tell. So that's what we've been using for Trashed, and as many as we can, we send with these, because no one can tell. Sometimes they're better quality, So that's what we do too.
Jaime, is this also something which should be included really into the best practices to figure out also green guidelines in terms of marketing and promotion?
Sí, tenemos la intención, como he dicho, de aplicarlo a...
Yes, we want to extend this to the entire value chain. So, at any rate, this good or best practice handbook will be advertised next year with a public tender generated through a company that is specialized and capable of doing a comprehensive analysis of everything that needs to be included. We will also include technical instructions and the obligation to cover the entire value chain, including distribution, the festival sector too, the festival industry, where many activities can be done. I have been taking notes of some ideas already, also sharing posters, for instance. We are doing posters like those in all festivals, and many of them have advertising for films in the San Sebastian Festival. We have a huge banner that can be then used in the Gijón Festival. we just stick something at the bottom, or there's different ways of doing it. But anyway, to your question, it will include the entire value chain, distribution, marketing. As you were pointing out now, we don't want to develop this from the public administration. We rather want for private companies that know perfectly well about the impact and the actions in different industrial sectors and companies be the ones that develop this manual or handbook of best practices that we will then approve with our legislation.
Valerie, where do you see the biggest need for really information, best practice examples in order to improve and to go to the next level? You mentioned that you have already implemented a couple of measures, but there are certain areas where there's still something missing. So where are your biggest needs?
I would say knowledge. I think. Sí, como decía antes, cualquier información.
As I said before, any prior information we could have will help us implement different measures. Shooting, I was telling some colleagues of mine before, a shooting is like a huge monster that will eat up anything that stands in front of him. When we talk about fiction, and even if it's only 25 people, if you have artists or performers there, at the end of the day, a fiction is something that disrupts the environment and adapts it to its own needs. So, assuming this, I think that these solutions must always be found respecting the nature of the problem. And it's difficult to change this. This is work that is done very intensely in a specific amount of time where we don't truly look at or analyze external factors. What I was trying to say is that we are now increasingly having a respect for the environment and sustainability. But what would we need? We would need to know and to be able to implement things beforehand in the workflow in each one of the teams. For a long time now, we do not buy any longer, we now rent. This is not just because of the economy, it's because of space matters. What do we do with everything we've bought? Because normally producers, or at least in my environment, we don't do as many films per year. We cannot store, and this makes no sense because we don't have a set. So we have just finished a couple of shootings this summer, and our production director was going to start a pre-production on the following week. So we asked him to take everything that was left over after the production so that he doesn't have to buy it again, because those were things that could not be rented out but are needed in every single shooting. Sometimes we have talked about being very watchful of the material we have among small producers to rent it out or to lease it. Sometimes you don't rent it from big companies because they're small things, but it's true, it's hard to implement all these things because it requires an additional effort apart from our own jobs. But if I believe in law a lot. I remember when we said we couldn't smoke in some places, and for me it was very difficult and unbelievable. But then 2 months later, we thought it was normal to not smoke, and now a few years later, we wouldn't be able to go back to smoking in places. So in terms of gender proportion and women, 4 years ago, we heard about women a lot, and now this is becoming normalized. the environment is as essential as this. So if we include the environment as a mandatory part of our conceptualization and of our work, we will help out, no doubt. Yes, just a brief comment. The environmental policy, well, the two basic factors are progressiveness and balance. It's not about imposing things immediately. If you don't make that first step, it will never happen. And you were asking for information. Well, this is one of the things we need to cover apart from the handbook of best practices. One of the things that we want to have is a list of public grants, because a producer may not know the grants in Andalusia or Canary Islands. This will facilitate the application of environmental measures, but also supplier companies. A list of supplying companies. I don't want to use maybe plastic bottles. Well, how can I get some bottles that I can use? Well, if we from the public administration can facilitate this to producing companies and other companies, we will do so too. And then there is something, if I'm not mistaken, in England, the awards of the British industry do not accept films that do not respect a series of principles that respect equality. And I think, well, why not environment too? If we are self-demanding these things, if you don't have that label, you can't play. There will be reactions at first, so why are you interfering in my work? But this is what the environment is about. It's not an individual thing. It's a joint responsibility matter for society. So I think that we can try and promote these changes, and we must do this from the corresponding institutions. In this case, we should talk to the Catalan or Spanish Cinema Association, also maybe the European one. There are prizes in the UK. They're awarding productions, eco-friendly productions or green productions, yes, but I'm saying that you can't maybe go to the Goya Awards if you're not meeting some requirements. That's what I mean. You shouldn't be able to be in the Goya Awards. Just a comment, brief comment. You said that normally makes the environment adapted to the environment. And from my perspective, very small perspective, in my research, I'm trying to find things that flee from the logics of this industry. Normally, I start working on my own space, so I choose a place where I think that there's some problems related to the Anthropocene, and then from here on I try to articulate those problems in a film, but I start adapting to the place more than trying for the film to somehow adapt to the place. I adapt. I think that we should do this as frequently as possible. I wasn't talking so much about the way I produce. I am more observing productions now. We do lots of documentaries, and documents are basically this. You get to a point, you observe, and you show, but you don't modify. You end up modifying something at the end of the day, of course, but well, we do small fiction, but not only the type of productions, the type of productions that we do are not the only ones in the industry, so they should be applied so that no matter what your size is, you need to respect some rules. And even if we wanted, sometimes when we're preparing and saying we'll do things this way or that way, the moment always comes when the crew and the lighting crew or the director, they end up modifying things you were not expecting. But we also make decisions. If we go to a place, we're not thinking about taking a catering from where we are. We try to find these resources in locally, but this shouldn't depend on a specific way of being or personality like yours. So I think that institutions should be forceful in this sense, should force us as an industry to do this.
Sí, es que esta reflexión es unido también a una...
Yes, well, this is very much linked to something Eva said before, and it makes me think of the need to be, and this is one of the two things, controversial things that I wanted to bring. This is one of them. Let's be audacious even against our own creativity. As editor and as writer, I could say this is difficult for me, but I need to find a balance between being audacious and being daredevil. These two things are so close that Greeks used to call them thrasos and tharsos, which is almost the same word. The filmmaking industry is not subject to environmental impact analysis. All other activities in Spain are, except for what the Defense Ministry does and cinematography. We should really think this through. If we're not forced to do these, let's force ourselves to do it. And these assessments establish a series of measures that can be balancing and compensatory, and the less impact is achieved with non-action. That's what it says. Of course, this places the author in this position of the zero alternative. So is this so important? Is what I'm going to do so important, or is it better not to do it? We have this fight between our ego and the possibilities, and to what extent my film is not necessary. And this is added to the fact that, well, you're all in the industry and you all know that nowadays there's lots of films, or some films, that are produced with all the expense and all the resources with no real intent of having all this ending up on screen. Because, well, this is less and less. Yes, less and less, but it exists. So investing all those resources, not only personal resources, but also planet resources, to make a film that its only aim is to do self-funding, to have cash flow, well, it's a waste. So let's take the zero alternative into account. Sometimes it's best not to do the film at all. And in terms of corrective measures, I've mentioned some. We go to different locations, we see how we can correct that impact, and also compensation. I may have not affected the location too much, but my compensation measure or action would be to leave a school or build a school or a permanent exhibition of cinema photos in that small towns, or maybe plant 17 trees. We should be quite daring, even in the fact that our talent is sometimes better expressed through silence.
Porque aunque nosotros seamos muy cumplidores.
But even if we meet all of the rules, and even if the way you shoot the film has respected the environment to the greater extent, and I am playing the devil's advocate here, but if this film will then end up in YouTube, Google, which is what consumes the most, this is like fulfilling my role as a good citizen. Is it like sorting the waste, but then someone coming after me mixing the waste that I sorted? So what's the purpose of all of this in the end? What for? I think institutions and governments need to make sure that all of this effort that we make has continuity, because in the end, I need to see that things have a purpose, that there's a meaning. Who will tell YouTube how they should work? Because you can tell me, as I depend on all of these bodies, but who is going to tell Google how they should do things?
Nowadays, we are also facing really a problem of overproduction, which is very much true in Europe and in all those countries, especially in Germany, where we have 460 million public film fund, and most of it goes into film production. And so the films are produced, and they don't have to be refinanced financially anymore by the theatrical release and other revenues, because there's so much money, and so they are just doing the next film, and often the films, they have a very small theatrical release, just for 1 or 2 days or so. Then we had, the first week of November, we had 26 films opening in Germany, and so you can imagine how many they will stay in the cinema after 1 week. That's why there's now a huge discussion in the industry if it should be, if there should be a shift in terms of funding from production to distribution and release, and but also a shift within production, that it could also make it more sustainable if there is much more invested in development. And then even if you develop a project and you find out, okay, this is maybe not a good film, or it's out of date, or whatever, then it's more sustainable not to do the film, and because if nobody wants to see it 3 years later. So there is also a need for a policy shift. So Carlotta, how is this situation in Catalonia? Is this also an issue that you're facing, you're dealing with?
Bueno, yo no puedo hablar por...
I cannot speak on behalf of the AV department because that's not my role, but I can say we have a fund to aid product development since 2015, 2014, Valerie, if I'm not mistaken, and it's true that this helps prevent potential success problems. You can assess beforehand, before you invest in production, you can assess whether the project is going to be feasible and whether it has potential, because you already contemplate potential international sales, marketing. So I think we're lucky that we have this tool for prevention to foresee what will happen in the future. And I think the question as to whether we produce too much or not, I think this is too big a question for us to answer. The Film Commission.
Jaime, you have a comment on that?
Relacionado con ello, porque...
Related to that, because when we talk about overproduction, I think there is overproduction currently. This also has a positive effect. For example, in Spain, at the beginning, well, in Spain we have a lot of talent, and this is why Netflix came and installed a production hub in Spain, because there is a lot of talent, not just directors, but illumination, set design, script writers. So we are probably going towards a bubble, a filmmaking bubble that will burst at some point. And this made me think, and as Carlotta said, it made me think about something else that I think is important, which has been caused by this overproduction, which is the general impact on the territory. And this is related to different policies which extract profit or use the film industry in a legitimate manner, such as tourism, film commissions, the Secretary of State for Tourism. They are delighted with the fact that Spain is becoming an international filming set. And I'll tell you an anecdote. Many years ago, I lived in Bilbao, and near Bilbao there was a teeny tiny church, almost in the sea. And many years ago I said, oh, when I die, you know, when you get all romantic and think about the day you will die, I would rather not die, but I thought when I die, before I'm 40 of course, I want my ashes to be taken to the sea and thrown from this small church. And last year when I was going to the San Sebastian festival, I said I will drive past this small church, and I was driving by and I saw 1,000,000 cars parked there, and the sat nav told me I had driven past it. And yes, I had gone past it, and it used to be a very secluded area, San Juan de Gaztelugatxe. Nobody used to go there, and right now there is a car park for thousands of cars, so people can go and visit the place where they shot something that was shown in Game of Thrones. So that's a dilemma again. There are different policies, different territorial interests, and they say, okay, come here for your shooting, and I will tell everyone that this character killed that other character in this very place. And then you find that there are 10,000 people every day going to San Juan de Gaztelugatxe. And I'm not saying that we need to hide this. I'm not saying we need to hide the locations because they're interests, valid interests. But this is something we should bear in mind. We should bear in mind this for future sustainability. Let's manage this. What we cannot have is that a location gets famous because of a scene, and then we get the impact that San Juan de Gaztelugatxe has. And I'm sure Carlota has many things to say about that. I want to add some things because I would like to decouple this association you made between Film Commission and tourism. I would like to decouple those because I don't think that's the case everywhere. And I think there are different types of film commissions in Spain and in Europe and in the world with different perspectives. And when the management of the film commission is done by the cultural department in the administration, I think their intention is different. It's not the publicity for that area, but collaboration with the local industry so that the productions that are shot in that area can work out and can proceed adequately. And maybe the role of the Film Commission is also to deviate these flows of tourism and to show other places that are attractive for the cinema industry, which are not the most well-known areas and the areas with the greatest impact. So I think it's important also to help the Film Commission, and the production sector in Catalonia is an accomplice of this. I think we need to help the Film Commission discover locations that can be exploited. Exploiting is an ugly word, but I withdraw it. I didn't say it. I take it back. Places where we can work. So we should shed light on some other areas without this meaning that tourism will focus on those areas as well. And well, we had an example with Valerie this summer in a production of yours. You worked in an area very nicely, and this does not mean that tourism will go there after that. It just means that we're using all of the territory as sets in a positive way. So I don't think we need to necessarily link tourism with the cinema industry or with the Film Commission necessarily. It is true though that we are tempted to do that. Yes, because actually I remember that that place you mentioned from Cine Europe, which is a website for cinema information about the industry, and they said they would give you a trip to that place if you signed up to the newsletter. So this was promoted by the geographical area itself. So yes, there is a fair way in which people make use of this, but in my personal activities, in my family activities this summer, we went to visit a castle in Catalonia where they shot some scenes of Game of Thrones, and there were so many people there. Why is that? Because it was not managed the same way. When I talk to Carlota, I never get the feeling that I'm talking to the tourism department, truth be told. I talk to her and I say, I need a place like this and that, and they give me a series of possibilities. But it's never one and only. I think the benefits for a geographical area of having a shooting there are many, and tourism may or may not be one of them, but it's not necessarily the main benefit, and it depends on your perspective. We're a bit late, but I would like to ask Juan, when you shoot or when you create, I'm sorry, and I'll pass the floor over to you real quick, but from the point of view of creation, the types of formats, the devices you're going to use, do you buy a camera? Because now we are hearing we need 4K and you may have a 2K camera, so what do you do about that? About your equipment? What are your decisions? What decisions you make from the minute you're writing the script? The cheapest option, whatever is cheapest, is what I use most of the time. You're very environmentally aware. The most efficient option is the cheapest option, and in my productions I don't have a very big budget, so in the end what's cheapest is greenest. I mean, if we need to use a few cars, we will use the least amount of cars possible because we save fuel, or we buy just the exact amount of food. There's never wasted food in my caterings, and the camera and the lenses that I use are lenses from the 60s because I like the aesthetics, but I recuperated them too. They were unused, and the camera that I used is old too. So I don't know. Now it's the first time that I've shot fiction. 2 weeks ago it was an experiment, and I shot in Flish where Game of Thrones was shot, and my film is a reflection about the presence of tourists in this geological site. So it's interesting that you mentioned it too. So almost in a natural manner, the production becomes green, almost even without wanting to. Do you have any questions, any brief questions? You have one?
A ver si me salgo y lo sé explicar.
See if I can explain it. My question is about the guides for coming years, and everyone talks about many different aspects. So my question is, in what way, how do we make it not just a statement, an empty statement? How do we follow up on all of these, and that all of these pre-production and post-production and production rules are not just that, are not just an empty statement saying, I will do that? How can we conduct a follow-up? You talked about technicians, but I don't know if you know what I mean. There are two things here. The obligations that are imposed, and with the creation of a label, there are companies who audit these labels. We have the EMAS label, which is the environmental label of the EU, and you go to the hotel in Cardona, which is recognized as a monument, and they have this EMAS certificate. This means they are auditors who have first researched and made sure that they meet the requirements, and then they conduct audits to ensure that they continue to meet those requirements. This in terms of the administration. And then that company has a person in their staff who is an advisor or a consultant that will say, okay, you need to do this or that. The toner shouldn't be disposed of this way, it should be disposed of that other way. You need to separate both parts of the device. So what will happen with all of this? When we develop the Good Practice Handbook, on the one hand, you will make your statement saying you meet the requirements and then we believe it or not, and nobody will give you a label or an ISO certification if you do not meet the requirements. And we, the administration, if you show us someone has given you the 14001 ISO certification, I will not question it. Or if we've said that whoever has the 14001 ISO certification will get 3 more points in the request for subsidies, that's 3 more points that you have. And then the next step would be either you present the 14,000, I'm talking about ISO 14001 just to mention one, just as an example. I'm sure there's a specific one for cinema. There will be a specific one for cinema in the future. But I insist, 14,001, the third stage will be either you present it to me or you do not have access to public subsidies. This does not necessarily need to happen tomorrow. What's essential in environmental policies is that we need to be progressive and we need to allow people to adapt over time and citizens to adapt over time. But we cannot say this will happen in the year 2100. It will need to happen in due time. I don't know if I answered your question with that.
I would like to add that we also have to understand that film production itself is also an ecosystem where things are also working hand in hand. So meaning if you are using LED lights, for example, and they require less energy, that means maybe you don't need a generator or you don't need so much energy, or you can use a smaller generator or go to the grid. So also if you work with different techniques, it also makes a difference in terms of the energy consumption towards the positive. And this is also something with because the modern digital cameras are much more light sensitive. And this plus LED is also that in the end the energy balance can be much better. There was another question by somebody in the audience?
Vale, pues... ¿Esa? ¿Sí? Gracias. Mi pregunta empieza con los 3 P's.
Question starts with the 3 P's, planet, profit for the people.
Tal vez ir más allá del green shooting card.
Beyond the green shooting card, which also can mean going beyond reducing impact. I mean, how can we generate social impact with what we do? Or environmental protection, how can we work from the environmental or social space, and how can we create alliances with social movements, or I don't know, maybe with different environmental stakeholders. I don't know how that could work. And not only doing the shooting, but also organizing festivals, how to create these alliances. I don't know what the opinion of the industry is, or the role of the industry, or does the industry have a role in this? I don't know.
Como lo has dirigido a la industria, o sea,
Since you addressed the industry, there are people from the industry here. I'm the administration, but I think it is absolutely necessary. And I said it at the beginning, the social image value of the cinema industry, the filmmaking industry, is not only about fulfilling the standards to minimize impacts, but also generating positive impacts via the repercussion. We just saw a film that was presented this year, Álvaro Longoria, a film about the Arctic, and the main characters are the Bardem brothers. This has a lot of impact. And alliances, I think Eva mentioned this, the mutualization, all of this needs to be generated, and I think it is essential. Or how is this done in the industry? Well, you are the industry, with communication, with a lot of communication. This year, well, the bottles, I had to go to the bar because I could not use plastic bottles. I had to go to the bar to buy glass bottles, but that's the only thing we could get here. What we tried to do is write our names with a marker so that everyone has and keeps their own bottle. You need pictures. No, I had a picture of the pictures that I wanted, the glass pictures, but I couldn't get them. So I was looking at the speakers that we were going to have, and this is why Susan is here. In the hall, I went to Primavera Pro and I started talking, and I asked them, what do you do with the carpet after the event? And thanks to the CCCB, we've been able to store the carpet, and the rest of the carpet that we needed for the hall, well, there's another event taking place here, which is influenced, so we bought the carpet, we shared the expense. And this has not happened. For example, Juan is here, and the Meseta film will be exhibited on Sunday, but then they're going to Gijón because it's premiering there. So with Gijón, yes, we have talked and everything is ready so we can share trips. He comes to Barcelona and then he goes there, so it's good. Those bottles, those metallic bottles you mentioned that cost 0.9 euro, they come from China. They're bottles that are not manufactured in China. In another festival, an environmental festival in Madrid, it was the other day, there was a producer, a large producer, that told us where they bought the bottles, and they did not come from exploitation. And it will be included in the handbook. Yes, well, it will be included in the lists of suppliers, not in the handbook. This is why I said earlier, I talked about wood. It is not enough to say, oh yes, we use wood. You need to make sure the traceability of that wood. You need to make sure that it is certified at the source. And these are things that make your life more difficult, yes, but it is more difficult, for example, having the entire world be a desert the day after tomorrow. That would make our lives difficult if the entire planet is a desert.
Sure to have a database with suppliers. On one hand, really practical, where can people really buy things which are produced in a more sustainable way and also social fair and so on. But this is continuously, of course, changing because there are new companies and then companies are bought or they're going bankrupt. But what is also very important is to look at the entire production and supply chain. And sometimes this is also happening through films. I just saw a French documentary which is really shocking. It was produced on television, and it's about the soya production in Paraguay, where 500 areas of the size of Paris are just taken to plant soya, and all the kind of pesticides cocktails from Monsanto and so on, everything is sprayed, and it's such an overdose that children are dying sometimes on the spot, or they're getting handicapped, and so their whole genetics are ruined. And the thing is, all this soya is for the food production, for the animals, just for the meat production in Europe. So all this soya is exported to Europe, and then it's fed to cows and chickens and pigs. And of course, we also get it back in the food chain. And all the toxic substances which are not allowed in Europe anymore, we consume them through this food chain, but there in Paraguay, it's really a big problem. And through this documentary, this went public and was on television, and now they have done a study, and doctors are working it and trying to making a proof. And because there are not laws in Europe, we have at least some laws, maybe not strong enough. But this is, and then in the end, it's like, okay, all these big supermarket chains who are really selling these products, they are also, of course, responsible. So it's all a global network, and so that's why it's really also important to the consumer to try to think, why is something so cheap? Why can I buy a sausage for 50 cents or €1 or so? It's because of this, and it's always the price which is paid by the environment and by people with bad living and working conditions. So this is also something we have to consider.
Es que ven los técnicos, los intérpretes.
Everyone will shoot me because we're so late. Just very quickly. Just going back to what you said about positive generation, I think this is connected to what Bridget said. The films we show, the debates we hold, and all of the promotion and advertising work that we do with the films that we program, that we curate. And with all of that, we can generate a positive impact by involving volunteers of all ages and all different profiles and nationalities, with or without roles in the film. This is the impact we can also generate with our events. We can go to towns and villages and do social communication with the people. I think this is a positive impact that we can have. What is the CO2 that we create, the footprint that we generate, can serve a purpose at least, so that it's not just purposeless. It depends on how generous we are with those volunteers. I apologize. Thank you so much for coming, for being here, and for sharing all of your knowledge and all of your practices. Thank you for coming. Thank you very much. And a round of applause, please. They were so good.
Gracias a los técnicos, a los intérpretes.
The technicians and the interpreters who did not shut down our microphones, even though we should have finished a while ago.
Muchas películas en relación con el tema están etiquetadas en la web.
Lots of things related to this, they are labeled on the website.
Y esta tarde seguimos profesionales.
Afternoon, we will continue with participative video from 5 to 8 at the hall. Thank you very much. Have a good weekend and good afternoon. Thank you.